Hey, I'm Jason Wood, the VA Loan Guy and host of the Armed and Ready podcast. Please come and check out this exciting episode we have for you. Hi, and welcome to the Armed and Ready podcast. I'm your host, Jason Wood. Today we have an awesome guest with us, Kevin Welch. Kevin is actually the brother of our producer on this show, Dylan, who runs Dylan Welch Media. So we're super honored to have you here, Kevin. It's cool to have some family on here, and you have a really interesting service background. So I want to just dig into it a little bit. For our guest, Kevin is a doctor. He served in the Peace Corps, and he's worked in some capacities and coming right into COVID that has lent some really cool experience and some good life lessons. So, Kevin, thanks so much for spending some time with us today. I know you're crazy busy, but we really appreciate you being on the show.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah. So, I've always wondered, from a service mentality, a lot of times, on this show, we talk about the military, right? And everyone's service in the various armed forces. And you actually served in the Peace Corps, which is a little different dynamic than what we've had on the show. So I was wondering if you could first just kind of tell us about the Peace Corps. Like, what is the Peace Corps? How did you find it? How did you decide to join? And what's it all about?
I can start off by saying everyone's Peace Corps experience is pretty different, but I'm happy to talk about mine. So really, the Peace Corps is it's a federal agency. It places people who are qualified, who are American citizens in different countries and working in different sectors like the education sector, health, environment, in different areas of need. And obviously it's very different from military, especially, our whole mission is different and we're not one of the unified services of the United States, but we do have that federal backing of the US. And we do take an oath for our service as well. So there's some similarities, but conceptually pretty different. But it was a cool experience for me. I built it into my graduate school education, where I did my practicum rotations in a small southeastern country in sub-Saharan Africa, Malawi. And a lot of people probably haven't even heard of it. But maybe for The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, it's a popular book and movie. It takes place there. So I basically what I engineered, I guess, is a program where I was able to do my elements for my degree through the practical experience during the Peace Corps. And there was a bunch of benefits with that because I had a living stipend. I could get some really cool hands-on global health experience, fill in an area of need, and, for me personally, get my grad school requirements out of the way, or at least some of them. So that, entailed getting like a memorandum of understanding together with the feds as well as with my university. But it worked out well, and I was able to do some really interesting practicums. Although it's not as big these days as the COVID-19 pandemic, I was over there during the Ebola breakout, and one of my practicums was working with the Ministry of Health of Malawi to figure out and plan for prevention and control measures for Ebola in the event that it crossed borders and came into Malawi. So working with the World Health Organization officials over there and a bunch of the bureaucrats over at their government to kind of figure out, ports of entry, what to do if it occurs. So that was able to be leveraged into my grad school program, which is pretty neat.
Yeah. Now, have you been able to, since we've been in the COVID pandemic, have you been able to draw from your experience dealing with Ebola and at least kind of compare or contrast like what's happened in the US with this pandemic compared to kind of what you experienced in with the Ebola stuff?
Sure. They're very different. They're very different diseases. Ebola is a different virus, different transmission modes than the coronavirus. But some of the similarities were the early on, the conditions back in like March, April 2020, and even February and January. I first had my eyes on COVID in middle to late January before it even left China. So seeing it coming was like a tidal wave almost. And, there wasn't really anything you could do. But one of the big comparisons that I drew with this is just the paranoia of, not really knowing if your neighbor's sick, if there's disease in your town, in your community. and just kind of the craziness that ensued as this kind of came upon us. So we are seeing that to a different extent in Malawi, where, communities that were near borders would suddenly have rumors of an outbreak of Ebola, and, it travels like wildfire just by word of mouth. So just trying to kind of, convey that we don't think it's here, and keep the peace, essentially. It really gave insight to how fragile society can be. And, and knowing, part of my education was history of medicine, and knowing what occurred in the past, the Black Plague, or the Black Death, the Julian Plague. Throughout history, there have just been so many pandemics that have destroyed civilizations. And it made me think about that and really appreciate what we have for, here in the US. And seeing how quickly things could fall apart we came pretty close. And I think not everyone in the country realizes that. COVID-19 could have been much worse if it was something that was as virulent as Ebola, even though different transmission modes, if the death rate was as high as Ebola, we would not be having this podcast right now. It would be it would be pretty bad. So we got lucky in that sense. And it's a lesson, I think, for everyone, now that it's really hit home in the US. And, we've been dealing with this for some time, and kind of the importance of really having measures in place.
Yeah. Now I remember, hearing a little bit of news about Ebola and stuff, but it wasn't, I guess, to scale, at least from a media perspective, that the coronavirus has been. And I've only seen little bits and pieces and uneducated completely in the topic. But as you mentioned, the death rate with Ebola was very high. Was there anything, I guess, was it maybe just not as prevalent in the US during that time, or were there measures that we took that helped keep it contained, or what was kind of the difference? It just seems like the hysteria with coronavirus was pretty high. Whereas Ebola didn't seem as high. Yeah, well, Ebola just didn't seem quite as amplified, at least in the media's perspective, from what the average person is seeing.
Well, I wasn't in the U.S. during Ebola, so I don't really know exactly what occurred here. But what's interesting to note, and I'm in upstate New York, there's more Ebola closer to upstate New York than there was to me in Malawi. So we didn't have any, we weren't on the side of Africa. It was basically separated by a whole continent. It would be like as if there were some Ebola cases, in Honduras almost. It's pretty far away and separated by international borders. But just the what could occur if it did move across borders, and making sure those borders were secured and ports of entry were being monitored. That was so really, you guys in the U.S. were closer to the danger than I was in that sense. But it was more just like the logistical side and planning and thinking about what could occur if it did cross over. Whereas in the U.S., I presume you guys just kind of heard it from the media about some of the nurses that would come back and be in hospitals in in New York City, for example. But so that said, the main thing that is kind of similar would be every country that is, in the UN and ratified the UN, they have protocols called the IHR, International Health Protocols. And these are carried out, studied, monitored, tracked, and evaluated by the World Health Organization. And I know the WHO probably has a pretty bad rap in the US these days. And our support had been at least temporarily pulled from the WHO. But the purpose of those IHR protocols are basically to make sure that every country that is in the UN is abiding by parameters to prevent and control infectious disease within their borders, to kind of prevent it from going crazy and becoming a worldwide pandemic like we've seen. As you can tell, it didn't really work too well. It's a very loaded statement to say it didn't work too well for COVID-19, but it's designed to at least slow down and to be able to put society in a position where they can prepare themselves for what's coming, if that's the case, and to mitigate. So yeah, I can't really speak to what occurred with the paranoia in the US, if there was any, for Ebola. I'm just, what I'm seeing is from my experience of COVID-19 here in the U.S. compared to the experience of, the paranoia of Ebola, the potential for Ebola in Malawi. And from what I understand, there's even the general public in many of the some of these African countries are really less attuned in a way to COVID-19 just because of some of the major limitations with testing supplies and vaccines over there. There's not really anything able to be done. So it's being monitored and tracked, but it's not as much of a concern potentially, also because of demographic characteristics of those countries as well. But yeah, interesting. It's very interesting to be able to compare them. And I don't think too many people have been in the same situations. And I have close friends that did go to ground zero for Ebola, where they were working closely with people who ended up dying from Ebola. And, they had to be so careful because all it takes is one tiny slip up and you're exposed to a very deadly disease. Whereas with COVID, a lot of my friends have gotten it. Family members have gotten it. I've had people, I know people who have died from COVID, but it's different in the sense that it's not an absolute death sentence in a way. Not that Ebola always is, but the outcomes are far worse. So, and in a way, we're becoming accustomed to it in the U.S. And honestly, to speak to the silver lining of all this, we're kind of seeing some benefits and how our society can adapt and evolve, cutting down pollution, for example, with more remote work. I like working from home, so.
Yeah, I think another silver lining piece has been kind of corporate travel too. So I think for companies who were sending their people all over the country on airplanes to go for meetings and stuff, I think a lot of that has shifted, obviously because of the pandemic, into more Zoom meetings like this. But I think going forward, it's probably going to become more of an option for companies, which will be a cost savings, right? And allow them to invest more in the company or in more personnel or whatever.
And, I can even attest to that. I was someone who had to travel every 2 to 3 weeks by plane across state lines for my work. So, and that was stopped right at the advent of coronavirus, and a bit of a welcome break. And, there's a learning curve, but people have adapted, I think.
So you graduated like right before the pandemic hit, right? And so tell us a little bit about that, and how has that affected your career right after graduation?
Since I came back from the Peace Corps, I've almost been working nonstop for the same company. There was a year where I worked for the New York State government through Health Research, HRI, which is a small consulting firm. But I moved on to basically a different firm where we do external quality reviews of basically global health applications. So it may be Medicaid measurement, various different federal reporting requirements that we're looking into and studying trends. So, one of the biggest changes is, we're seeing the implementation of a lot of the frameworks that we have for our processes being interfered with. And, another way to look at the public health sector is, or just the general healthcare sector in general, is the healthcare economy. So there was a lot of factors that were impacting dollar amounts, essentially. So it's not exactly exciting material, but to see these changes being impacted across the domain that I work in real time, and just having so little control, but also seeing that it was coming too, and not really being able to do anything about it is a shame, because that it's tied to patient outcomes and the overall health of a population that you're trying to serve, at least. So
Right. So I mean, speaking of service, kind of a good segue. Talk to us a little bit about service and that decision making process that kind of went into you're wanting to join the Peace Corps, and I know a lot of people go through when you have a big decision like that, a service type thing on your heart, and it's something weighing heavy in your mind. What were some of the processes and things that you went through personally to get through it and kind of weigh options? And what kind of advice would you share with people who are maybe in a similar position and they're considering doing something, that could be pretty big, pretty impactful?
There was a lot that went into that decision. At the time I had graduated from a master's program, and I was working for Harvard University in Boston. And I wanted to figure out the next step, and I wanted to pursue graduate education higher, you know, maximize my potential, either through more education, which, you know, almost in hindsight is crazy because I was so burned out from 6 years at that point, but, or else, you know, pursue novel means for a career that would have me on a continuous upward trajectory. And it came down to two decisions, and you know, I applied to the Air Force Biomedical Science Corps. I'm sure, you know, you get people who always say, "Oh, I almost joined the military." I went to MEPS, and I was waiting for a waiver for my vision. And uh, during that time, I got into my grad school program, and I only really applied to that because of the interest in with my advisor, who liked the idea that I was interested in global health and putting together this Doctor International program through the Peace Corps. So while I was waiting for the waiver to come through, I basically just canceled my application for that avenue, and opted to go with going for more education and the Peace Corps service, just because it seemed more aligned with more opportunities in the future. So it was kind of hedging my bets. And that's kind of been a theme that I've found has been running rampant in a way, where I'm always calculating and almost over calculating and thinking about all the possible outcomes and weighing those in my mind. And a lot of those calculations, it's based on unknown information. So to make a decision where, you know, I'm willing to pick up everything and leave behind my family, friends, dog, all my belongings, and move to one of the poorest countries in the world that, you know, who knows what I would even be able to do at that point. I didn't have my assignment figured out yet. I still had 2 months of training once I got into Malawi anyway. It was kind of, you know, see what you can make of the situation. And, you know, if it turns out for the best, then, you know, it's almost like a lotto ticket in a way. Not, the odds aren't that bad, but you know, it was basically, if I can pull this off, it's really a monumental step forward in my career, which would open up so many doors. And I found that it has, and it's paid off. And that's, as for my advice to the layperson, whether it's one of your listeners or anyone in general, is, you know, account for your instinct, but also look at all of what could go great and what could go bad. Study literature, but also, you know, make sure that whatever you're making your decisions off of, whether it's media or peer-reviewed articles, you know, make sure there's not inherent bias to that, whether it's just, you know, like if it's political biases, if it's publication biases. Some of them can be more subtle than others, and just balancing all that information. And it really takes a mindset of being able to critically analyze. And I credit being able to do that to, you know, some of my education and just upbringing. I was very lucky. And I know not everyone has that opportunity, and it's hard to make decisions that will pan out well in that case. And that's why, you know, I count myself as being very blessed in that sense, and especially with how I'm able to really leverage that information further in my training, to really be able to study trends and forecasts and apply it across multiple, you know, multi-disciplines basically. So, and we can talk more about what I've done in real estate as well, but I've kind of, it's helped me develop creative solutions for very complex problems and to see them through and track and monitor them. So it's something that's a skill that really has to be honed by the individual who's interested in pursuing whatever their endeavor is. But it's just time and energy. You got to spend it.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line.
Yeah. You got to invest a little bit in all of that thought, right? Because, you know, the outcomes can constrain such wide endpoints, right? So, yeah, talk to us a little bit about real estate. How'd you get involved in real estate? I mean, you're pretty young, so to be, you know, a real estate investor at a young age is on its own an accomplishment that stands, you know, aside from, you know, all your career stuff. But tell us a little bit about that. How'd you get into real estate?
Well, thanks for thinking it's an accomplishment. Sometimes it's the bane of my existence.
As being an investor can be, yeah.
So it actually stems going back to, the decision making I was doing back when I was finishing up my master's program, when I was at that crossroads that I mentioned of taking a military route, going into more education or something else. I was really put off by the level of anxiety I was having in a way of student loan debt and not making much money, living in an expensive city. And that was it was part of my approach to almost like an umbrella creative lifestyle solution. Trademark that. And but basically, I was like, this is like, student loans are miserable. No one should have to pay so much money for an education. I think education should be a right. People should be entitled to information, and that information can be used to better themselves because it betters society. And how expensive it is crazy. And that's coming from someone who not volunteered, but I went to one of the most expensive grad schools in the US for my master's. So I was looking into how can I figure out a way to use these processes and, make it a mutual beneficial situation for myself and for, the school that I'm paying my tuition for, because obviously they need to get paid too. It's how they afford to hire good professors and all that. But anyway, what I realized, or what I found out, is something called the public service loan forgiveness option. And public health is already in the domain of public service. So,
Sure.
And what that is what public service loan forgiveness is. If you have certain kinds of federally backed loans through the Department of Education, if you work for 120 payment months in public service, you get the remainder of your student loan forgiven. And, if you pay the minimum for those 120 months, and it can be pretty low depending if you are able to keep your adjusted gross income down, for example, and you select basically income-based repayment, you can really cut off a lot of money at the tail end there, and really save yourself quite a lot of money that's forgiven by the government and perfectly acceptable to the government. It's, there's no big tax bill at the end. It's cut and dry. So that was kind of step one that I put together in my mind. And step two was housing. So housing in Boston was so expensive, and it was such a drain on my wallet. And what I realized is that with student loans, you can use that to pay for your mortgage. It's not just for rent. It's, you get your living expenses as well as tuition, and it's optional to take out those living expenses, but a mortgage for yourself qualifies. And I'm like, well, everyone always says your house is an investment. What does that mean, really? And I looked into it more, and yes, it's an investment. It's not always the best investment, but it also has a dual function as a tool. So figuring out, for housing, if you buy, figure out what you want to spend based on how much it's a tool and how much it's a potential investment, how long you want to have it, and how long you want to, what you can do with that tool in a way too. And how that tool kind of brings back dividends in addition to the dividends from owning real estate. Step three was create a financing for this. And I used an FHA loan, which is very low down payment for owner-occupied houses. And you can live in a multifamily house. So I was like, okay, well, this sounds very interesting. I can pay up to, I think it's like 3.5% down and like a decent interest rate. You pay PMI, which is, mortgage interest, but that's forgiven, or it's removed from your monthly mortgage bill after it reaches either 17 or 18 if you request it, or 20% automatically. Depends. There's a few factors with that, but I'm like, that's already cheaper than rent. And if I can have tenants in I can use my student loans, basically the living allowance or the living expenses for the mortgage for my house that I live in, and I just happen to have tenants too. Well, that's going to even offset my mortgage expenses even more. And that I made sure that all qualified, because I'm thinking down the line, well, I can really make this work for me in more ways, because not only am I going to be putting student loans into a mortgage payment, which is, a better return than a rent payment in most cases.
Yeah.
I'm also helping myself make some extra, money being a landlord on the side too. And, I'll be neighborly with them, and I'll get to know the people that I'm living next to as well. But that's also going to be forgiven apparently with public service loan forgiveness 10 years down the line. So I'm like, this is great. This is a loophole in a way. But it works. It's allowed. And I guess identifying these types of loopholes is part of the creativity. And, what's interesting is it has a bad name. Like, people will be angry at politicians for figuring out a loophole with taxes or whatever. If it's a loophole, then it's just a benefit in a way. And they were smart enough, or they hired someone who was smart enough to detect it and make sure it was allowable. If it's not allowable, it's against the law. And, that always comes to the question of ethics. And that's a whole nother conversation. But, it's figuring out these loopholes, and especially if they don't really hurt anyone. Arguably student loan forgiveness is, hurting people because it's coming from tax dollars. But in a way, I think because it's public service, you're giving back quite a lot to the, to society as it is. So that's, in a way, a tax that you're collecting on society. So it was justified in my eyes ethically, and it was allowed by the rule books. So I had my first house on hand, and I was, thrust into being a landlord in addition to working on grad school stuff, and also working full time for my current role, which my current company. So I have quite a lot on my plate at this point, and
Yeah, I'd say.
I want to still keep control of expenses. So instead of having to outsource some of the landlord duties, I watch YouTube videos and I figure out basically step 4, how to DIY everything. And I've been shocked by, I've stuck my hand in electrical boxes like an idiot. The breaker was off, by the way. It was it was like static or something. I've caused floods. I've done probably tons of damage to my own properties in the midst of all of this, but I learned how to do it myself. And it's, in a way, it's like continuous education that medical doctors do, but like life continuous education. It keeps me figuring out how to solve unique problems that are, that arise typically as emergencies, and how to do it effectively and cost effectively, as well as to the satisfaction of whoever, the tenant or whatever. So that was kind of another learning experience, and I realized I like doing it. And now that I could potentially, I have some savings, and, I've been being careful spending, I'm starting to actually make good money. I still haven't graduated yet, but I'm getting closer. I'm writing my dissertation now. I'm back from the Peace Corps. And I'm like, I want to buy another property. So this time I buy a 3-unit, like a brownstone in the middle of the city here. And this is, you could probably throw a baseball and hit Cuomo, the New York State governor. It's
Sounds
center of
tempting.
government. A lot of people want to hit him with a baseball. So that's it's a great metaphor there. So, and that one has been, another, it's just figuring out, what's a worthwhile income generating stream that can be at least somewhat passively managed. And so now I found myself having a total of 5 units across 2 properties, and I'm in my mid 20s, late 20s at that point. And I'm like, I'm setting something up, really setting something up here that I can thrive off of and keep growing. And I'm making contacts in the industry, and I'm getting people who see my dedication both to public service, but also to was still more or less my hobby at this point. Real estate is a hobby, it's almost like art therapy in a way. Doing these projects and getting them done. It's
Right.
like it's chicken soup for the landlord's soul. Oh my God, I'm probably gonna get hate for that comment, but but I do, and I continue to pride myself on giving good service to my tenants too. People's well-being are at stake, and you're really closely, intimately involved with that. And so in a way, as maybe it's because I'm relatively idealist, I'd give them the red carpet service, but they would stay, and I would have almost no I would never have vacancy gaps. People loved to live in my apartments. My tenants were so happy, and that was really rewarding. And also, it was good for business. And a phrase that my brother can probably share with you is, or you've heard it yourself, I'm sure, good business begets good business. And that's so true. And I was really seeing that. And at that point, I'm like, this is becoming less of a hobby, and really, like, there's a lot here to this. And I'm living in this like little tiny upstate New York City. I kind of have like a sleeper niche in a way, because the state government's here, and there's universities. We have State University of New York at Albany, we have RPI, we have Siena. The capital region is, in a way, like a gateway to really nice places in and of itself, but also to the Adirondacks, to Boston. Chicago's not far, Montreal, and New York City is only a short train ride away too. So I'm like, there's something here, and I grew up here, so you kind of are almost blinded in a way sometimes when you grow up somewhere and you want to escape. But I guess at that point I'd come back. I had seen some crazy stuff in the Peace Corps, and in my 20s, I traveled to over 80 countries. I did an internship in my master's program in Ghana as well. So having lived in sub-Saharan Africa for like 3 years, I really saw a lot of potential. And I think some people don't always see that potential right away, especially younger people. You kind of have to go through, and I'm sure you've seen some stuff in the military too, and it you appreciate things differently. You come back changed, and how you leverage that change for your life moving forward can really pay dividends. And I was seeing that with kind of how things turned out. And a lot of it just had to deal with how I made those calculated decisions early on, and balancing some of the unknowns and kind of rolling with punches as they occurred. So yeah, I continued to grow my portfolio from there. And, I'm now up to, with basically the appreciation due to the pandemic in this area, my portfolio is worth well over $1 million, and making me more money than my salary job at this point. And I've, starting in February, I've now outsourced my property management to a company to do all of the nitty gritty details, with the fixing broken pipes and filling vacancies and dealing with tenant issues. So I've elevated myself within my own essentially small business to be at the executive level. And I've also filed my LLC, and I'm continuing to explore real estate opportunities. And now it's really just, it went from being a hobby to a semi-passive income stream to a passion, and something that can be done manageably with the rest of my life. I'm still working with the same company, like I said, and the fact that I'm balancing all of it somehow and managed to graduate and surviving this pandemic, the second, major disease outbreak I've been somewhat intimately involved with, I guess, has been almost a miracle in and of itself. And what's been nice is I've been able to help people that I've been around and who rely on me, and share my income, my insight when it's asked for, and hope to help people, I guess, and help them grow and stay safe.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I love how you pursued the multifamily route. And I speak to a lot of young people, primarily military people, looking to buy a home. And it's a conversation point that I bring up a lot. And it's not for everybody, right? Some people doing the multifamily and having tenants and so forth is not the path for them. But I love that you went down that path, because I personally believe, especially when you're young and you don't have family needs of, lots of bedrooms for children and all this stuff, with a family, that it's really a huge opportunity to grow a real estate portfolio that's going to totally take care of you down the road, right? As you're witnessing now, passively you're making more than your job income, which is the dream, right? Is how can you passively have income coming into you without having to clock in and out every day, 9 to 5 for it. And
GameStop. I'm just kidding.
yeah, well, that's one way, yeah. But I mean, that's a huge opportunity, and you fast forward, and you're very calculated in the way that you think, but you fast forward to, when you're 50 years old and these homes are paid off or nearly paid off, you've got two incredible benefits facing you now if you held on to them that long, which is the appreciation gain and the amount of equity in those homes, which if they're almost paid off is going to be rather large 30 years from now. and the amount of income that you've made over the course of that time. And eventually when that home is free and clear, that's all income less your operating expenses, right? So for a future vision on what that does for you on a retirement standpoint, has a big impact, really big impact.
When I'm 50, I'll be probably, 1/3 of my life will have been over, seeing as how I'm playing to live a very long time. But it gives me, more importantly, means to keep growing and to build that portfolio even more. The income that is pulled in from rents is, it's higher than your mortgage payments. You have to kind of figure out creative financing at each step as you add on each new property. Fannie and Sally don't really want to give you more than 4 mortgages, so it starts to get more complex. But if you have a good relationship with a local lender, and I've had bad relationships with local lenders. I've actually I've filed a lawsuit against a lender who was engaged in shady activities and caused a sale to fall through. So you really have to do your due diligence here. And on top of that, there are unknowns. Real estate is still an investment at the end of the day. 50 years from now, there could not, we don't know what the value is going to be for these houses. It's most likely going to go up because, the population is just going to keep going up, and there's only a limited amount of land that can be, used for residential homes. You make that assumption, but those assumptions can turn out to be untrue. I mean, take a look at what just happened with COVID-19. Everyone's world just got turned upside down, in a lot of different ways. And I've been lucky, but you don't really know, and you have to make some assumptions. And then when those assumptions change or the factors change, you kind of have to adapt, and always being on in that regard, and studying kind of just the environment, the influences. But also really importantly is getting yourself set up and understanding how multifamily rentals work and how you can make money, and what different types of financing is available, whether it's FHA or conventional, what buying points means, what low interest rates mean, what capital gains tax is if that's gonna have a bearing, how all of that interacts with a given price point that you're seeing in your current market. And, if you have to wait to buy, or if you need to buy everything you can at a certain time, be prepared to do that. And, it's really your personal risk tolerance and being prepared to act based on confidence that you've done enough due diligence. So it all goes back to kind of studying the material and knowing, that there's unknowns, and there's going to be risk, and it's going to be hard, but putting forth the energy and the time to really understand a lot of these mechanisms and just the context of it all.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, Kevin, look, man, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Really appreciate a lot of cool insight for those who are weighing any big, decisions of, contributing to society in whatever form, to real estate investing. Really picked up a lot from you today, and I hope our listeners really enjoyed it. Shared a lot of great information, and I just want to say thank you to you, and thanks to your brother for getting you on the show and spending some time with us today. Appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Great speaking with you guys.
All right, man. Have a great day. Take care.
You too. Thanks.
Thank you so much for checking out today's episode. If you have any questions about the guests on the show, please reach out to me at valoanguy.us.